I don't want him down there. I put flowers on a grave with no body. I listen to a voice that's not there. I expect him to walk through that door, but he doesn't come. I wait for his hug, and I don't feel anything. He's dead, and I miss him. You remember my dad, because I want him remembered, and I loved him. His only child, me. I'm sorry. I didn't think it would get to me this way. And thank you all for always making us, the family members, feel so welcome here. This is our paradise. And if it wasn't for you and being here before we even went for the bell or made it a memorial, this is like our second home. This is where we come on November 10th.
It's interesting that to note that the Fitzgerald went down in the month of November, and in many reports, official Coast Guard reports, it's stated that November is probably the worst month of the year as far as shipping is concerned. Why is November so bad?
Oh, the storms come up so rapidly. The weather is very unstable.
29 men rest in silence beneath these waves. But if you listen closely, their voices are still heard. When you hear the gentle rhythm of the sea, listen closely and you will hear me. Let me whisper pleasant thoughts in your ear and caress your feet as I draw you near. Look to the horizon and you will find me, for I have forever become one with the sea. When you hear the roar and crashing of the waves, come close and let me envelop you in the spray. Feel my fury, but do not fear it. Capture instead my undying and indomitable spirit. Come share the many moods of the sea, and you will join and become one with me. 50 years after you were taken from your families, we want you to know that we still hear you, and your voices will never be silenced. Today, 68 swimmers begin a new chapter in carrying on your legacy. You have passed the torch to us, and we are honored to accept it. We know your spirit will be with us as we complete this journey 50 years in the making.
This makes it all worth it right here.
This is me at 17, just sending this in as an obituary to the Milwaukee Journal, because that's where my dad was living at the time. I called it, I Want Him Remembered. Oliver J. Champeau died November 10th, 1975, on the Edmund Fitzgerald. My father was a big and strong man who wouldn't take much from anyone. But when he'd laugh, his cheeks would light up like Christmas lights. He bought me my first bike and taught me to ride without training wheels. He brought me my first Holy Bible and made sure that the bishop blessed it personally. Even my first car, which came with a set of instructions that had to be followed. I was as proud of him as he was of me. I was his little girl. He was my friend, the man I called Daddy. He was going to give me the biggest wedding ever, but now he won't even see me graduate from college or high school or see his grandchildren. Where is he? I see him talking to me in my dreams. He'll be with me through everything. I have his temper and his looks, and he is part of me. He is part of me. Please bring him up out of the cold lake. I don't want him there. I don't want him down there. I put flowers on a grave with no body. I listen to a voice that's not there. I expect him to walk through that door, but he doesn't come. I wait for his hug, and I don't feel anything. He's dead, and I miss him. You remember my dad, because I want him remembered, and I loved him. His only child, me. I'm sorry. I didn't think that would get to me this way. And thank you all for always making us, the family members, feel so welcome here. This is our paradise. And if it wasn't for you and being here before we even went for the bell or made it a memorial, this is like our second home. This is where we come on November 10th.
Some of you, I can tell, are watching the monitor, and some of that imagery, you're seeing the ship being launched, you're seeing different aspects of the story, let alone those photographs of those 29 men that were on board the ship when it sank. We actually have some crewmen that served on the Fitzgerald with us here tonight, too, and one in particular that I've gotten to know pretty well. Richard, glad you and Teresa are able to be with us here tonight, too. When we meet and talk with individuals like that, it's amazing how much more we learn about that ship. And we also learn about people that they sailed with, and we learn the same thing from the families like yourselves that are here tonight. We feel like we get to know that crew a little bit better. And that helps us do what we do here at the Shipwreck Museum. It helps us to better understand the story. So with that, we're going to get right into the program, but I would first like to introduce a friend of mine by the name of Brother Jim Boynton, Society of Jesus. Jim is going to come up and provide the invocation.
It is a tremendous blessing to live near the Great Lakes. A sunrise or sunset over the water can fill us with deep emotions. Just being near the water can be an inspiration and draw us into nature and relationship with the higher power. In the oldest Christian traditions, blessings are given in the sign of a cross. Oddly enough, the cross is a symbol of death or a burden one must carry. For those of us who live on the Great Lakes and have felt their power, our response to the cross and its symbol is unique. How do we do this? Here are some of the ways I have witnessed. When my mother came home from college for Christmas, after her first semester away, she found her mother had given her presents to the neighbor. Mrs. Abbott had 5 children, and her husband Beans had just been killed building the Mackinac Bridge. Grandma knew they needed the gifts more than my mother. Each day as a boy, I walked past Mrs. Oya's house on my way to school. I noticed the large F on the chimney, but did not know what it meant. Then my father told me Mrs. Oya's first husband was my dad's friend, Johnny Fogelsonner, second mate lost in the sinking of the Carl D. Bradley. That F was a constant reminder of Johnny's loss. Dad and I used to go ice fishing with Gary Gustafson. When he and his father Elvin were lost in a commercial fishing accident, all of St. Agnes turned out for the funeral. Similarly, when Eddie Moses, a native fisherman, went through the ice, St. Agnes was struck. The families of these men are left to carry on their legacy. Today, we remember your fathers, husbands, brothers, uncles, grandfathers, and loved ones. How do you carry the cross? Jesus himself gives us an answer. On his way to Calvary, Simon of Cyrene shared the burden. Jesus let another help him. In this, both Simon and Jesus set the example. Let us pray. Lord, as you modeled for us that we cannot carry burdens alone, give us the grace to also accept the comfort of others. And as Simon proved, anyone can help at any time. Please give us the grace to offer ourselves in service to those in need. We ask you to bless this community here today and scattered throughout the world, and give us the comfort to know that the captain and crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald are now under your watch. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Jim. So next we're going to move into what we call reflections. And I can look back to my first few years under my predecessor, Tom Farnquist, who's in the audience tonight, coming to this program. Tom started this tradition after the bell had been brought up and made a part of this gallery, started the tradition of having different individuals coming in that could speak to a different aspect of the history of this story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I kind of alluded to that a little bit in my opening remarks, and really, I think this is probably one of the more enlightening aspects of this memorial each year, because we will hear from people that had either a direct connection or in many different ways have learned just that much more about the story and can share it with the rest of us. The first person I'm going to introduce tonight has probably done more research on this subject in recent 3 years to tell us all about this story. And his name is John U. Bacon. I got to meet John about 3 years ago when he started this process of researching and ultimately writing a book about the Fitzgerald. And I have to admit, I had known of John before because I used to listen to Michigan radio. I would hear a lot about Michigan football. That made me wonder about him a little bit, but I'm a Buckeye, so that explained that. But the more I listened to him, the more interested I became in those stories he would share about the team. But I became even more interesting yet when I read his book about the Halifax explosion. An excellent book. Most Americans don't know this story, but it is a story of Canada and the U.S. coming together at the same time through a very tragic event. What he did in that book is he brought the human stories out. And I knew when he started talking about a Fitzgerald book, we were going to see some stories that we had never seen before. And that's exactly what John has brought to his book, The Gales of November. So with that, I will introduce author, historian, and Michigan football expert, John U. Bacon.
As always happens when I follow Bruce, I have to bring the microphone down. I am 5'8". Great, thanks, Bruce, for that, of course. Thanks to all of you. There are two basic centers that I used to research this book over the last 3.5 years or so. One was the Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City. That's where 4 of my best sources came from, who explained to me how all this works. They knew the crew and the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So clearly very helpful in many ways. The other, of course, is Bruce Lynn and this great Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. And through him, he had gained the trust over the years of the family members who are here tonight. They did not know me from Adam, of course. So Bruce very generously, and at some risk, frankly, lent his credibility to me, and that made all the difference. Despite the fact, as he pointed out, that Bruce is a fervent Ohio State Buckeye fan, and I am not. I'll leave that at that. But also, as Bruce said, my goal when I set out, of course, the mystery of this ship attracts countless people to it. We all try to advance, I suppose, certain theories and shrink others perhaps along the way, but that was not my motivating force, it's not my drive, and certainly I got to know about the Edmund Fitzgerald. I wanted to tell a bigger story, basically. One, about the ship itself, about shipping itself, but especially about the men involved and the families involved, many of whom are here today. The Fitz was, in fact, all that. When you write a book proposal, by the way, you put together about 50 pages, and you send it out to New York, and then it circulates around the publishers. You're basically a geologist from Shell Oil Company, pitching Shell that, hey, there's oil down there, and you hope that Shell buys it, basically. In this case, the oil just kept on springing up. Every time I looked at the story, it got better and better and better, including, and more interesting certainly, including, of course, the fact that the Fitzgerald really was the greatest ship on the Great Lakes. It was the most famous ship in the Great Lakes before November 10th, 1975. And I got that from 6 crewmen I had met along the way and interviewed in the process. And they said, without question, this ship was best in class in all regards. And they also said, if you're going to be on the Fitzgerald, better get a haircut. Why? Because when you go through the Sioux locks, they'll be taking your photo every time. And the crowds would wait for you for a day to come through. So, taking a bigger scope than that, of course, than just that, I wanted to see why was the Fitz so important? Why was shipping so important? And I learned a lot of things about that, of course. One, the incredible dangers of the Great Lakes. I grew up in the Great Lakes. I thought I knew them very well, and I had no clue. When I talked to the experienced sailors, perhaps the greatest shock I had was that to an experienced sailor who's been on both the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes, They say the Great Lakes are far more dangerous, and it's not even close. And of course, the salty captains, they would just laugh when they saw us until, of course, they got on the Great Lakes, saw the waves, and sought safe harbor. That's what they did. So, and as Rick Barthulli, one of my other experts, said, how dangerous are the Great Lakes? Ask 30,000 men on the bottom. That's how dangerous they are. That is one per day, every day for a century. That's how many people we lost from 1875 to 1975. And I think it's very fitting and very generous of families here to always recognize the fact that this is part of a much bigger picture, of course. So the power of shipping, of course, the power of the region is hard to imagine. During World War II, the Sioux locks were so important because all the iron, of course, had to come from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula down to Willow Run, where they're building B-24 bombers, 1 per hour, every hour, for 3 straight years. That's Rosie the Riveter, of course, and others. Their work was so essential to the war effort, the arsenal of democracy, that FDR commissioned in 1943 a new lock be built, finished by 1943. They finished that in 15 months, working 24 hours a day, every day for 15 months, an incredible effort, and also positioned 7,000 troops there during World War II. It was the single most guarded point in North America during World War II. Why was that? That is the spigot for those machines, of course, the tanks, the planes, and the artillery, you name it. Without Great Lakes shipping, we lose the war. That's how important it is. And of course, the power of the region, I talked about that a bit earlier, how expansive this region was. This was Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley. But more than that, it not only raised these crewmen, 29 people, into the middle class, they brought others with them by the millions. The shipping industry lifted millions into the middle class. You can see that in Michigan alone, of course, from 1945 to 1975, the state highways, the state parks, the state universities. Between 1945 and 1975, the state universities of Michigan increased from 9 to 15, and the 9 we already had expanded greatly. Michigan State started with 4,000 students in 1945. They finished with 40,000 students in 1969. That's how much this fueled the growth of this region. And of course, ultimately, these crewmen's kids would go to those schools in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and elsewhere. Shipping, as I said earlier, is 3 times more efficient than trains and 6 times more efficient than trucks. That's an incredible advantage. That's why you move anything you possibly can on these ships. And if this is the case, of course, they would carry 26,000 tons of taconite per trip 50 times a year. 26,000 tons of taconite builds 7,000 cars. And they did that 50 times a year. That is 350,000 cars per year over an 18-year career. That's almost 7 million cars that ship alone sought to build. That's an incredible contribution to what we do. What's amazing more about this to me, though, is how invisible this industry truly is. As one of my experts, John Tanner, the Great Lakes Maritime Academy superintendent for many years, as he said, we know the fireman, we know the fisherman, we know the factory worker, we know the farmer, of course. We don't know the sailor. And why is that? There are only 30 on a ship, times 300 ships, that's 9,000 sailors at the heyday. All right, again, spread out amongst 8 states. You're not going to meet them, and even if they live next door to you, you're still not going to meet them because, of course, those guys are on a ship, as you know. When I talk to Heidi Wilhelm Brabant, when I talk to Deb Champeau, when I talk to Pam Wittig and others about what it's like to be in a family of sailors, that is not easy. And Deb is going to tell you a beautiful story, I'm sure, about her and her father, of course. She's got to write him a letter, no email back then, as he travels through the Great Lakes, pitching him on buying her a new prom dress, shoes, and yes, a hairstyling. And all that back then cost $85, which is not cheap. So this is what these kids had to do, what these families had to do in that process. As I said about John Hayes earlier, John Hayes liked nothing better than to finish the season and to come home with a nice big fat paycheck, bonus check in his pocket, sit in his favorite chair by the fire, a chair that was not moving, which is important, of course, get his favorite drink. His kids would come on up and hug him and say, "Daddy, you smell like a truck." And of course, he would say, "No, I smell like a paycheck." And that's the lives these people led that I had no idea about until I started working on this book 4 years ago. Why, of course. Why the ship went down has fascinated everybody for 50 years. I've got a stack of books in my office with this theory, that theory, and every other theory you can name. But I tend to side with John Tanner, the guy I mentioned earlier, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum superintendent. He said these ships never go down for one reason. It's almost always a compendium of reasons that start multiplying, and when the dominoes start falling, it can get very scary very fast. And I was in Duluth 2 days ago for a big conference on this subject, and one of the speakers before me said, everyone talks about how the ship was made, mechanical failures that night, decisions made along the way, et cetera, et cetera. He says, what they don't talk about is the storm. All right, that is ultimately the reason why this ship went down. It was the worst storm in a century with 100-mile-per-hour winds and waves up to 30, 40, 50, even 60 feet high that night. We now figured that out with computer models we did not have access to 20 or 30 years ago. That is a very big reason, of course, why the ship went down, naturally. But I really side with Aunt Ruth, Bruce Hudson's mother, who said only 29 men know, only 30 know why the ship went down. 29 men and God, and no one's talking. And ultimately, we are all guessing as to what happened, and only they know. What I do care about intensely, of course, are the people on the ship, less the why than the who. I wanted to find out who they were. I did not know a single name before I wrote the proposal of this process. I didn't know the captain's name, any of the crewmen, and in this 4-year process, I've got to know all of them quite well and flesh out their life stories, of course. So I was very curious about that. And I also got to 6 crewmen who were on the ship before it went down, including 2 who were on the ship that year. They knew the captain, Captain McSorley. They knew the crew. They could tell me about each and every one, their nicknames, their habits, what they were like. And one of them, Patrick Devine, had just gotten off the ship in September. And Patrick said, I have to tell you right now about the Fitzgerald, everything about it was first class. Every aspect of that ship was best in class. Our living quarters, the galley, you name it, the cargo holds. And he said the captain and the crew, you could be assured, at every level of the crew, they were the best at what they did on the Great Lakes. And that man had been on 10 ships before and after this happened. So he knew what he was talking about. And he also said, and there are also, by the way, on this ship, no weirdos. And he was quick to add, and this was the 70s. And the ones who were laughing loudest were from the 70s, I noticed, by the way, so they know what I'm talking about. He said, look, these ships often were the land of the misfit toys, right? Guys trying to escape something or try to find something. But this ship was not like that. This was a bunch, he said, Patrick Devine, a bunch of truly good guys you wanted to spend your time with. You didn't go back to your cabin and hide. You hung out and you played cards in the galleys and told stories. These are the guys I got to know on this ship. They say, of course, that history is written by the victors, but in the Great Lakes, history is written by the survivors. And I ran into that when I was talking about the 1913 White Hurricane, of course, that claimed 19 ships and almost 300 men. And in that process, there are a handful of ships where no one survived, and we know almost nothing about them. And that broke my heart. And what I did not want to see happen is that to happen here on the Fitzgerald. We know the song, we know the number, we did not know the people. And I thought that was heartbreaking, truly, especially as I got to know the families. A few quick stories. She'll tell you about Buck Shampoo, but I'll tell you about Blaine Wilhelm, Heidi's father, a sweet man by all accounts who had 7 children back in Makwa, Wisconsin. And he had struggled to pass the next test to move up the ranks on the ship, but he had gotten his courage together and got a friend to help him. And he was prepared during a longer off season than usual to take the next test and go to the next level. These people had hopes and dreams they were working hard to fulfill. And every day they went to port and came back, of course, about once a week. He would take the change from those stops in Silver Bay, Minnesota, 2 harbors, Duluth, Toledo, Zug Island, and so on. Take that change and dump it in a big old Maxwell House coffee can. And at the end of the season, he'd come home to Makwa. They'd all gather around the family table, and he'd dump it out there for the kids to split. And as Heidi pointed out, that money went very far when candy bars cost 10 cents. But what that can has always meant to me. That can is your family. That can is a deposit you make every day you're on the sail, on the seas. A reminder of why I'm doing this. A reminder of whom I love and where they are. All right, an investment you make literally every day. And then 9 months later, you show them. You show them how you felt about them when you're gone. That is asking a lot. We've got Bruce Hudson, of course. Bruce Hudson was a 22-year-old deckhand on the ship, an Ohio State student who took a couple summers off to make some very good money at the time, and he was very judicious with how he spent it. He saved a lot of it except for his hotshot 1972 Dodge Challenger burgundy muscle car. In the passenger side, in the back seat, there's a sticker, all right, of the Columbia Transportation logo you see on that stack. That's how proud he was to be on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And he and his buddy, Mark Thomas, also of Cleveland, were about to head out that summer in 3 days. All right, in 3 days, about to head out, that November, on a cross-country trip to Colorado and to California. And as I said earlier, they're going to Colorado to get Coors beer, which was considered quite exotic at the time. I still love that fact, by the way. But in the meantime, he finds out that his girlfriend is pregnant. Cindy Reynolds calls him at the payphone at Silver Bay, Minnesota, and he says right away, don't worry, we'll move in together. We'll raise our child ourselves. We'll be okay. And she's deeply reassured by this, of course. And then she tells him to go ahead and go on that trip with Mark Thomas. You've earned it, and you'll be back in plenty of time, of course, when the child comes up in June. And I'm pleased to say that daughter is Heather, and she's here with us tonight. These are the lives these men led. Last one, Eddie Binden. Eddie Binden, we got to know because 2 years earlier, we're in a very similar suit. My son, Teddy Bacon, was asked to ring the bell for Eddie Binden here. Why is that? Because Eddie Binden and his wife, Helen, were 47 years old. They had no children, and they didn't plan to have any children, of course, at that point. What he did do, however, is want to celebrate their 25th anniversary by buying her a 2-carat diamond ring in Duluth, Minnesota, the day before they left on November 8th, 1975. And instead of stuffing that into his duffel bag like you normally would, he gave it to a good friend of his in Duluth with the address and a love note to wrap around that case to mail back to his wife. And of course, we know the rest of that story. 3 days later, she gets that in the mail. And with that, of course, she put the ring on her finger, wore it for the rest of her life, and never remarried. And I would not have known that unless we were involved in your family. And Eddie and Teddy Bacon, my son, came up here 2 years ago, rang that bell, and we have a picture of him walking back through the aisle with tears in his eyes. I knew nothing about Eddie Binden 2 years ago. All right? And these are the lives we discover by getting to know you. And that is a life clearly that was worth living and clearly a life worth remembering. From this ship, it was such a shocking event when this ship went down. 6,000 ships went down from 1875 to 1975, as I said earlier. 6,000 ships. A more stunning stat is since November 10th, 1975, the number is 0. Why is that? When this ship went down, it was the golden boy of the Great Lakes. It was Titanic. Truly, it was 9/11 for the shipping industry. And as John Tanner told me, when do you fix anything? When it's broken. This is the ship that convinced everybody that we must do things differently, and we're doing them now. And 6,000 before did not reform the industry, but this one did. And there's your proof, of course. What changed? Forecasting improved, communications with the captains improved, but also plain old common sense. Right? Instead of the previous greed of the corporations and the aggressiveness of the captains in many cases, right, common sense kicked in. I can prove it to you because exactly 1 year ago, minus 1 day, on November 11th of last year, windy day, I'm down there getting my photo taken for this book. That's the flap cover. 30-mile-per-hour winds, 40-mile-per-hour winds, 10-foot waves. Nothing like what they saw that night, of course, 50 years ago, but enough that every single ship in Whitefish Bay was anchored that day. And I guarantee you that 50 years earlier, not one of them would be. That is a testament to the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald. They're the ones who instilled that common sense in the generations that followed. They also say that you're not truly gone until the last person who remembers you who cared about you, who loved you, is also gone. In this case, of course, I was afraid of losing the crew twice. All right, once, of course, on November 10th, 1975, and again, by only knowing a number and not who they were. And that I thought, again, I could not abide by. I can say this, I know more about that than I did a month ago. I'm uniquely positioned, as it turns out, the last month to tell you just how incredibly well remembered these people are. I've been on a book tour, 20 stops in 10 states from Miami to Montana. I've done probably almost 100 interviews on Goodreads.com, when we're surprised. We knew we were going to, the dads of the Great Lakes were going to be attracted to this book. We did not expect on Goodreads.com the women in their 30s and 40s to outnumber everybody else 2-1. We are finding new people with this story, to tell this story, to pass on the legacy of who these men were. And that definitely surprised me. I was more surprised when we put the 2 chapters on the Gordon Lightfoot song, the unlikely creation of it, as well as the unlikely success of it, into Rolling Stone magazine in an excerpt. And that story for 2 days was the hottest story in Rolling Stone magazine until Taylor Swift sneezed on Wednesday. And we lost our spot. But think about that for a second. These people worldwide who read Rolling Stone magazine were not here last year. They're probably not watching the podcast. They're not part of this circle. All right, and now they are. The circle is not shrinking as it does for most of us. It is actually expanding for this crew and their legacy around the world. I think nothing proves that more than today's event at 2 o'clock. I can't speak for Bruce Lynn, but I can speak for myself. I was stunned when I stood there at a similar podium and looked out in this crowd, and man, you had to look around to really see it. I could not see any space. All right, it's about 3,000 people, I think, and I think 3,000 is a fair estimate based on my rough human calculations on what 3 miles of cars will get you. All right, 3,000 people, and it was still 30 degrees, and they're wearing their Carhartts and their boots, and there's 90 minutes, and I didn't see anybody leave. I didn't see them on their cell phones. I didn't see them do anything other than pay respects for the people who are here. That was an incredible display. If you drive through that lane, you saw license plates from Iowa, from Florida, from all over the United States and Canada. It was an incredible display, and one we could not have scripted. We had no tickets. We had no reservations. We had no idea who exactly was going to show up, how many, and from where. That, if Aunt Ruth could see that. Aunt Ruth, on November 9th, 2015, talked to Gordon Lightfoot from a phone in the crew's quarters when Pam Wittig was here, talking about her aunt. Gordon Lightfoot comes charging into the crew's quarters. He's there to see them. He's not there to play. He's there with Rick Haynes, his bass player, and I talked to him as well. The first thing you ask is, where is Aunt Ruth? And Pam Wittig told them that Aunt Ruth is on her deathbed in South Carolina. Give me a phone. So he calls up Aunt Ruth, and they're talking, and she tells him that she promised Bruce through prayer that she would join him before the 40th anniversary in heaven so they could be together, because Bruce had been alone too long. And of course, Gordon Lightfoot himself is getting choked up when he's hearing this, and he understands her wishes. She hangs up the phone and says to Cindy Reynolds, the mother of Bruce Hudson's child, and says, I was talking to Gordon. That's how well they knew each other. That's how close they were. That's how much this story draws people to it. And then a few hours later, she honored her promise to Bruce Hudson and joined him in heaven. I never met Ruth Hudson, and the people who read this book are not going to meet any of the men in there. But I feel like I have met Ruth Hudson, and hopefully when you read the book, you will too. What I think of today is if Ruth Hudson could look out over that field and see 3,000 strangers there to honor the crew, what they did, what they represented, and what they mean today, she would have to feel gratified, I believe, that her son's life was not in vain. And as I said earlier, that you're still alive so long as people remember who you are. All right? Bruce Hudson's life has been extended today, as have all the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, so much. not only for bringing context to the ship for so many people that maybe don't know as much about the story itself, but really bringing to everybody in this room, but also anybody who reads what he's put into his book, the stories of these men and the people that were around them at the same time, which really does, to me, those are the most important stories, and that's really what brings this ship and crew to life and keeps their memory alive at the same time. We're very fortunate here tonight, not only to have John as a speaker, but also we have some of the individuals that actually are in his book and other people's books. These are the, I wouldn't say unknown stories, but these are the lesser known stories that make up the overall story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the next speaker, and I mentioned his name, Tony Hall, in my introduction and my opening remarks. Tony is definitely an individual, and Mike Zeranek, if he were here, exactly the same way, that really put their lives on the line to try to save their fellow man. And in this case, traveling all the way across Lake Superior in a storm that's severe enough to sink a 729-foot ship so quickly that they didn't have a chance to get a distress signal out. But those gentlemen put their lives on the line under the command of Captain Jimmy Hobaugh. They crossed the lake. And Tony, I invite you to come up to the podium and share a little bit of your story. I was looking in the wrong direction.
Hello, everybody. I'm proud. I'm honored to be here. I sure ain't no John Bacon, but I'm going to do the best I can. That guy is a great speaker. At my age, I have a hard time remembering why I walked into the kitchen. But 50 years ago, I remember pretty good. We were, if we didn't have the duty in the ship, we was scattered everywhere. Duluth Superior, because they were close together. It was a sailor's port, and when we got the call, it come over the PA system, TV screens, for all crew members, get back to the wood rush. And so we all hustled to get back to the ship. When me and a couple of buddies got back, we were hustling to get extra food on board, water, fuel, anything else we could think of. And we left Duluth with about 2/3 of our crew, and the rest met us in Sault Ste. Marie when we finally got there. We pulled out that night, and my captain, he kind of took special interest towards me, I guess. I don't know, maybe because I was so skinny and helpless, I don't know. But anyways, his call to me when we was underway, Seaman Hall, you get to the bridge now. And that was my cue to get a cup of coffee. He wanted it like yesterday. So anyways, after I was able to get the coffee up through, as we were pulling out after the third try, as we went farther out in the lake, it got worse and worse. And if you didn't have any responsibilities on the bridge, no reason to be there, you were below decks. And if you didn't have duty in the engine room, you weren't supposed to be in there. But there had to be people in both places to maintain the ship. Anyways, as we got going, the cooks had special grating on the grills to keep their pots and pans in place, and they were made just for heavy seas. But that didn't matter this night. There was flung everywhere, and to walk from one compartment to another, that was getting virtually impossible. I mean, where the floor was, you were now stepping on the walls. That's just how bad it was. And the only ones that could really tell you what it was like, how the water was, are the people on the bridge. That would be Captain Hobaugh and Robbie Ravina and Craig Collins, who were on the helm all night. And other than that, everybody else was just below decks. And the only place to be safe was in your rack. And I literally had to take the long sleeves of my work shirts and tie two of them together and tie myself into my bunk. And a lot of the other guys are doing the same thing with whatever they could find. And anything that wasn't nailed down or welded down, tied down, it just got flung everywhere. So if you can imagine a wine bottle cork and a wash machine, that's about how we was. And we finally got to Whitefish Point, the last known position where the Fitzgerald went down. A Navy plane had dropped a dye marker in the water. So we did a grid search there. We started out with a grid search. We dropped a side scan sonar over the side, and we did a grid search. And they kind of thought they found it like right away, but they wasn't sure. Just to be sure, we just kept doing more searches and come back to that spot. Anyways, that was the spot. And but as you all know, we didn't save anybody. Everybody. She was at the bottom before we even pulled out, and we didn't know this. And but Captain Hoball is just his persistence to get there as quick as we could. He was just his perseverance. He was a leader, a total leader, and a father to his men. And no, he had everybody's respect. And even to this day, even though he's not with us anymore, he'll be a legend always. And with that, 10 years, not to get off track here, but I'm trying to fill everybody in on how things went. But 10 years to go on the 40th anniversary here, we just happened to be coming through the UP, and we come in here, and it was a lot going on, and we didn't realize. My wife and I just stopped in just because we were in the area, and out by the lighthouse there was a patio deck, and my wife and I took a walk out that way, and there's a woman out there just looking over the water, and that happened to be Deb Shampoo. And anyways, I didn't know it at the time. My wife says, "I'll bet she's one of the family. You go talk to her, Tony." And so I went out there, and excuse me, ma'am. I told her my name. I was on the wood rush, and that's all I got out. And she started crying and grabbed me and hugged me, and I started crying, and it's been kind of like a family thing ever since. And I'm sorry, folks. That's all I got.
Tony, thank you so much, and thank you for being here. And I'm glad that your wife talked you into talking to Deb, because we've been getting you here just about every year since, I think, at this point. So we're honored to have you each year. And Mike, if you're watching us, we hope to have you back here next year as well. You mentioned Deb, and we'll go right into our next speaker. Debbie Champeau is she's the daughter of Oliver Buck Champeau, third assistant engineer on board the Fitzgerald, but she was also instrumental in lobbying the Canadian government, along with Aunt Ruth Hudson, and Janice Armagost, Cheryl Rosman, to make the possibility of having this bell here, and also having that wreck site being declared a grave site. So let's welcome Debbie Champeau. She's going to tell us a little bit more of the backstory.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deb Gomez Felder, but I use my maiden name for, to be here with, oh, too tall.
There we go.
I'm shorter than. Many of you do know me by Debbie Shampoo because I like to be connected to my dad. 50 years ago tonight, the gales of November came early, and my father, Oliver Joseph Shampoo Buck, him and 28 others on board the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, all of a sudden were lost. I am his only child, and now I am his protector. When I am gone, my children and my grandchildren will continue the legacy, as some of the other families here tonight will do as well. For half a century this day, it's been marked as a profound absence in my life, illustrating how the families fought over this last 50 years for those 29 men. The Great Lakes took 29 of good seasoned men that night, who we loved dearly, deeply. But for those of us left behind, it didn't just take a crew. It took our fathers, our husbands, sons, and brothers. The list is endless. It stole our opportunity for a final goodbye. We lost our final opportunity to say, I love you. And for all of us, the chance to have a formal funeral just did not happen. I remember small everyday things about my dad. His voice, his stern questions about my grades in school, keep those up, but mostly his beautiful blue eyes. They seem to twinkle in my presence. Some details you might never forget, and you never will. He would ask me to sit closer to him on our trips up north to visit family. His gigantic hugs would just embrace me, and the way he'd tell a story, a joke, his laugh would fill up the room. Memories like these, we hold precious to our hearts. My sadness today isn't just for the man he was, but for all the moments we never got to share. My dad was a proud Marine in the Korean War, but to see his youngest granddaughter become a Marine, fighting a war in Fallujah would have made him so very proud, as it has made me. To see his other grandchildren become so extremely successful in life would have made him so very proud, and I am proud of all 5 of them. He didn't get to see me graduate, walking me down the aisle on my wedding day, or most important, meeting his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. The sense of stolen time, a future unwritten, is a regret that never fades. Mine is just one story. There are 28 other families who carry the same weight. Our shared loss is beyond stronger than steel. Our sense of commitment to each other, we are family now. We never knew each other like the band of brothers they were, but we are finally now committed to each other. For 29 years, the Fitzgerald rested silently. The ship's bell was still there, sounding a silent memorial at the bottom of Lake Superior, with Ruth Hudson, Cheryl Rossman, Janice Armagoss, Florence Benson, and I kind of followed along. And so many others, family members. We started to gather petitions from all the families. With the support of Tom Farmquist and his remarkable staff of divers, the Canadian officials, Canadian Navy, National Geographic, Sony, and the Chippewa Native Americans, they all made this possible. And we appreciated that so much because that was something we didn't think we'd ever have. I also just want to say a thank you to the town of Paradise because the people in that town embrace us like no other. They are family too. And there's many others that were affected that day, and I don't mean to overlook anyone because we do appreciate everything you've done. When the ship's bell was retrieved in July 1995, it was a moment of mixed emotions. On one hand, it gave us tangible piece of history, a symbol of a horrible night that we lost our men forever. The bell is the soul of the ship, the closest we could ever get to our loved ones. It was the first time families were close to the buoy marking the spot where the boat sank. Wreaths, pictures, letters, and flowers were thrown overboard in the hope that they would reach every single man lost that night. My 5 children waited on the shore, and this would be the closest that they would ever get to their grandfather. It was a tearful and extremely mournful moment. To imagine that night was impossible that day, since the sun was shining brightly on us and the lake was completely calm. My Uncle Jack, my dad's brother, and Cheryl Rosman rang the bell for the very first time in nearly 3 decades. It reminded us that the men, our loved ones, could not be retrieved. They are all still in a permanent place in the lake. Our quest became to keep the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald a gravesite. No divers, no future investigations. We, the families, they're here today, some of us, made it sacred to never be disturbed again. Next, our mission became to spot a declared grave, to make that site a declared grave. Our strong leaders led the way to carry out just that. No more diving, no more treasure hunting, no more conspiracy theories, leaving our men with dignity and the respect they deserve. We felt that way then, as we do today, and will continue to go into the future. In 2006, the Ontario government amended the Ontario Heritage Act to protect the shipwreck as a watery grave. This has been an ongoing fight from then to now and probably into the future. There are no mysteries there. There are no more answers we need 50 years later. Why is the Edmund Fitzgerald so important? It isn't just about this ship. Anyone who has lost family on the Great Lakes is just as important as our loss is. Over an estimated 30,000 lives and approximately 6,000 shipwrecks have been recorded. We just took another step in a fight to retrieve a bell and declare it a gravesite. If Gordon Lightfoot hadn't brought acknowledgement to the unseaworthiness of the ships on the Great Lakes, where would we be today? He was a wonderful man and a great friend to many of us. The lake holds its secrets, but it holds our men, respecting and giving them the dignity that they deserve. This was our final act of love. This annual ceremony, the museum at Whitefish Point, the Mariners Church in Detroit, and many other places, these are all our living memorials. They are how we pass the stories to the next generation. No matter where we are and who we're with, we are still connected with our 29 families. I thank Bruce Lynn and his wonderful staff. They have supported us, accommodating us, and we're really not an easy bunch. We can be quite demanding every year, not just this year, and we appreciate everything he does and his staff for us. 50 years later, we are still here, a community of families bound by a shared loss, but also by a deep and an unbreakable love. I'm not the naive 17-year-old girl I once was. I and many others have heard it all. Our message now is still no more diving. This is my father's grave and other people's husbands, fathers, brothers. We don't want them disturbed. Our bond is just not in mourning, but in a shared commitment to remember and to be on guard to protect and honor the final resting place through the next generations. We are alive and well, and we'll never stop our commitment to those we love. My father's not here. but he lives in my memory. He lives in my heart and in the laughter of his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. And in the enduring legacy of the Edmund Fitzgerald, he lives on through me. We, the families, carried out the impossible. We are continually on watch. If anyone here is with their dad, the last thing I ask of you is to please hug your dad and let him know how much you love and appreciate them. I never got that chance. With the blink of an eye, you may not have that chance again. Life is precious and time is limited on this earth. Love the family God gave you. To my dad, I hope I've made you proud, and know I love you very much. Your memory and the 28 others who died on the Edmund Fitzgerald will never ever be forgotten, and I will continue to protect you till the day I take my last breath. Thank you all for being here and remembering with us and sharing in our sadness and loss. May the 29 men of the Fitzgerald rest in peace. We will never, ever forget you. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, so much. And I can honestly say that we absolutely love the fact that, Debbie, you come back every year, Heidi comes back every year, Pam comes back every year. It's like, I've said it before, it's like a small family reunion that we all have each year when you come back. And that also includes Tony and Michael and everybody who's been coming back and joining us. And I will say this too, we are so happy that we have so many generations represented here at the same time of Fitzgerald families. Now, we're going to shift over to one aspect of the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald that really separates it pretty much from every other shipwreck on the Great Lakes. That difference is the fact that a Canadian folk singer by the name of Gordon Lightfoot wrote a song about the Edmund Fitzgerald. And as much as we all like to think here at the Shipwreck Museum that we do a really good job of telling the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, there's nothing that we can do that compares to Gordon Lightfoot. Because if it wasn't for Gordon Lightfoot, it would not be in the public imagination as it is now. It would not be a story of a shipwreck that people throughout the country and really throughout the world are familiar with. Now, the story of the song itself is one worth telling over and over. And this is where Mike Fornes of the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute is a masterful storyteller. He got to know Gordon Lightfoot, the man. His band got to know Gordon Lightfoot's band. And really, Mike does a fantastic job of telling this story, and it is an amazing one. So let's give a round of applause to Mike Fornes of the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute. Sorry.
I spoke about this topic earlier today, and many of you, I saw the hands go up, were outside. You're going to hear some things again, but I've got some stuff I saved for you in here that they didn't get to hear outdoors. We didn't have time. It was cold out there, you know. But I'm going to let you in on a few things that they didn't have. I have read that Gordon heard about the sinking of the ship while flying on a flight from Los Angeles cross country. And that isn't borne out by his tour schedule. His tour schedule in the fall of 1975 was actually in Detroit on the 8th of November. On the 9th of November, he was in Boston. And on the 10th, he was off and then never played again until the 21st of the month when he was in New York. Now, maybe he went to Los Angeles on some business. Maybe he did read about it on a plane coming back. But does it really matter? He told me that he heard about it on the news the night it went down. He said he was in his writing room upstairs in his home in Toronto. and was fooling around with 3 or 4 chords that he just remembered from an old Irish dirge when he was a child. Didn't have any real purpose to it. It's just something he was working on at the time and happened to remember these mournful chords. And he went downstairs about 11 o'clock to get a cup of coffee, and the news was on. CBC television was telling about this ship that went down in Lake Superior, the Edmund Fitzgerald. And Gord said it was windy that night in Toronto, but he said he was horrified because Gordon was a sailor. Gordon used to sail the Port Huron to Mackinac sailboat race in his boat. He got a bigger one later on and did Chicago to Mackinac a few times. So he knew what could happen on the Great Lakes with storms, but nothing like this. This would be, far and beyond worse than anything he had ever seen. But he had a feeling for that, for those people. And in the days that followed, there wasn't much news that followed. There didn't have anything new to report, really. Nothing had been found of any evidence that was newsworthy. The ship was gone, and nobody knew much else. And, news is kind of slow to get out of this area, to go downstate to the big markets, I mean, hey, let's face it, if it happened today, Wolf Blitzer would be right here every 10 minutes with a report. The technology is different today than it was back then. So we just didn't have that kind of news coverage. Time went on, and Gordon didn't really know much more about it. At the time, he was working on a new recording, a new album that was called Summertime Dream. Summertime Dream was a new effort that was going to try to continue the path that he had set from Gord's Gold. I don't know if you remember Gord's Gold, but it was a double album. It had all the big hits. If You Could Read My Mind, Carefree Highway, Rainy Day People, Canadian Railroad Trilogy, Cotton Jenny. They were all there. But he hadn't written this shipwreck song yet. So the record company said, Gord, you need to really do it upright on this one because the radio audience is there. They're listening to your music now. This has got to be good. Well, Gord had 22 songs that were nominated for the Summertime Dream album. 22 that he felt were pretty strong. The record company said they would take 10. And I said this afternoon, and I'll say it again, I don't know how many of you remember, but we used to have vinyl records. We'd have 5 songs on one side, and then we'd turn them over. We'd play 5 songs on the other side. And that's how it worked. And songs back then were 2.5 to 3.5 minutes long. That's all the radio stations wanted because they had too many commercials to play. So to have a song that was longer was very unusual. So Gord was in good shape. He had music to put on this album. But he had a legal pad, and he started scratching out words and writing things down to try and get the order of events as to what happened with this ship. And as time went on, he was lacking in facts. He didn't have enough information. And then here was an article in Newsweek magazine that talked about the ship. And it wasn't a cover story. It wasn't a feature story. It was a blurb in the middle of the magazine in a news index that talked about other stories that were going on. And Gord was fascinated by this because it kind of aligned the events as they happened and gave him some facts that he thought he could probably put into a song. And the title of this story was called Great Lakes, the Cruelest Month. And the very first line in that story said, according to a legend of the Chippewa tribe, the lake they call Gitchigumi never gives up her dead. Have you heard those words before? Yeah. Gordon took that line right from that article and used that in the song and other things that were in that article too. Things that talked about the ship leaving Superior, Wisconsin and having 26,000 tons of iron ore, and the ship was the pride of the American side. It was the best big ship we had, and it was a captain that was very experienced and a crew that knew what they were doing and had been through storms before. And they got into some trouble with the weather, and the weather got worse and worse and worse, and pretty soon that ship was in trouble. And the captain began asking for help. And another ship following, we know it was the Arthur M. Anderson, was asked to help out. And they kept them in sight until the lights went out and they didn't see them anymore on radar or visually. And the ship was gone. And it ends by telling about the stone 126-year-old church in Detroit where a pastor rang the bell 29 times. 126 years old, that church. I was just there 3 nights ago and played at their ceremony. And you know, I've never seen so much stained glass in a church. It was gorgeous. And you know, it got moved from a block away. They picked that whole church up and moved it on a railroad system and didn't disturb one stone in the church. It's remarkable. It's really remarkable. But 50 years ago, it was 126 years old. You know, that's really, really something. So Gord took all these words and started to put them together and tried to get his facts in order, lining them up, you know. So let's take a look at the song. Let's take a look at the words that Gordon Lightfoot wrote and try and figure out what he was thinking to write this like this. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. Well, that's right from that Newsweek article. That's right there in that story. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. Isn't that clever how he turned that around to make that work? That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. And I think early on, that was the first time he had ever seen those words written, was in that magazine article, a reference to the gales of November. Today, as journalists, we might capitalize that. But back then, nobody had really called it that. And it became kind of a working title for the song. Gord thought that might be what I'll call this song, the Gales of November. So he's already mentioned it once here in the verse. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. Now, I just played a concert 2 weeks ago in Superior, Wisconsin, and they had a big event up there going called Friends of the Fitz. And our band went up there and we played for a wonderful audience. They're very proud of the fact that Superior, Wisconsin is the last port that the Fitzgerald was in before it left on that fateful journey. And I said to the people, I was setting up the song to play it, and I said to the people, you know, it's too darn bad that Gord didn't get the name of your town into the song, because he could have. I mean, coming back from Superior, Wisconsin. It could have fit, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. It isn't some mill, it was Superior. Coming back from Superior, Wisconsin. And people thought, yeah, that's kind of funny, you know. Well, little side story here. Gord and the guys are playing in Sioux, Ontario. And it's about 20 minutes before they're going to go on stage. And they're all dressed and ready to go. They're in the green room. And on the wall of this dressing room is a framed map of Lake Superior. Not a chart, a nautical chart, but a map. And it shows the whole Ontario coastline and the whole Minnesota coastline and the whole Wisconsin coastline and to Michigan. And it's got the roads and the towns and the highways. You know, it's not a nautical chart. And Terry Clements, their lead guitar player, wonderful guy, the most humble guy you'd ever want to meet. And sometimes he would say things. He was smart, a smart guy. But sometimes he'd say things and they just came out funny, you know. Well, I mean, he'd be on stage and he'd be playing that lick in the middle of Sundown, you know. And he'd finish that and people would clap. They'd applaud for him playing his part. And he'd get this look on his face like, oh, shucks, you know. Well, Terry is standing up there at that map. And he's got his finger going along that Wisconsin shore. looking at it, following it, looking closely at that. And Rick Haynes, the bass player who tells this story, said, "Terry, what are you doing?" And Terry says, "I can't find it." He says, "What do you mean you can't find it?" He said, "I can't find the town." I said, "What town?" "You know, the town Gord sings about in the song." And Rick said, "What?" And Terry said, "You know, Samillan, Wisconsin." Samillan, Wisconsin. Not some mill in Wisconsin, but Samillan. How many times had he played that in a concert, and every night for years, and probably never saw it written out, and just assumed that's what Gord was singing about, was Samillan, Wisconsin. Okay. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. I asked Gord about that because the route of the ship was pretty well known. They were going first to Zug Island near Detroit. It's a dumping ground. It's a place where ships dump their cargo and then railroads come in and pick it up and take it where it's got to go. After that, they were going to Toledo. After that, they were going to Cleveland. So Gord, what's up? Gord said, "Well, I thought Cleveland rhymed the best." So Cleveland got in the song. And it works. With a crew and good captain well seasoned, when they left fully loaded for Cleveland, and later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? It all rhymes. It works out. Come on. Would we have liked the song as much if he had sang, "When they left fully loaded for Zug Island"? It wouldn't have had the same appeal, the same romance to it, right? The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound. Wow, that's descriptive. And a wave broke over the railing, and every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late, and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. Probably right from that article in Newsweek magazine. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed you." Now, do we know that the cook really said that? We'll never know. But Gord did some research, and through letters that he wrote and phone calls that he made and people he talked to, he found out that's what happened on the Anderson. They weren't eating. So probably it was the same way on the Fitzgerald. Who wants to cook when that's going on? Who wants to eat anything when that's going on? Nobody, right? At 7 p.m., a main hatchway caved in. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know you." And that line was the line that was made famous by Ruth and Cheryl and Janice and the others who went to see Gord in concert in Green Bay and got backstage and challenged Gordon. And Ruth said, "I don't like that line in the song. My boy Bruce was in charge of the hatch covers. You make it sound like my son sank the ship." Wow. Gord took a step back. That was hard. He didn't write anything in that song to point the finger at somebody or place blame on anybody. But to hear that, wow. And it wasn't until that next summer that Canadian television program, Dive Detectives, when exploration was allowed, got video and showed the ships broken in two. That must have happened awfully fast and awfully violent. The hatch covers leaked? Well, at the time, that's what the Coast Guard told us. That's what they thought. That's what the National Transportation Safety Board thought. But here's evidence. And Gordon changed the line in the song. Can't change the record, But in live performance, he now sang a different line there. At 7 p.m., it grew dark. It was then. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know you." The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Pretty well straight from what he read in Newsweek and what he found out in his research from talking to people. You see, Gordon didn't get any of these things by Googling them, you know. He talked to people to get the facts straight. This next line, this is how you get into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Wow. The Reverend Todd down at the Mariners Church the other night gave a short little homily at the beginning of the program about that line and said, you know, was God present when that happened? And he assured us that he was. He was there, and that it was his will, and that we don't always understand it, but that's what happened. The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. And then there's all those theories, you know, which we've heard from different people, and John told us so well that no one cause, probably. They might have split up, Gord said, or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And then there's the line that always hits me so hard every year coming here. And all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. And there all of you are. Why did this ship sink? So many factors. Weather, overloading. Did they hit bottom at some point? Was the hull compromised? Were they taking in more water? Did the load shift? They couldn't pump out enough water. The two storms colliding like a cyclone, a bomb cyclone. All that topside damage that we don't think happened on the bottom. We think it happened up above in the waves. The three sisters, the three big waves that hit them, that hit the Anderson right before they went to the Fitzgerald. So Gord takes us on a tour of the lakes. Lake Huron rolls. Superior sings in the rooms of her ice water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. Gord did read that the church was 126 years old, and it was made out of stone. And so he refers to it as, in a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed in the Maritime Sailors Cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Well, the Reverend Richard Ingalls, who rang the bell 29 times, wound up visiting with Gordon at a concert at the Fox Theater. And he got backstage and told him, "Thanks for putting me in the song. It's kind of my claim to fame." And Gordon smiled and said, "Well, that's great. I'm glad you're happy with it." And he invited Gordon over to the Mariners Church. And when Gordon got over there and got to visit, he realized that it wasn't musty in there at all. You know? So now he's offended a pastor. You know? He felt terrible about that. So yeah, he changed that too. In live concerts, he changed that too. And so I do it too. So in a rustic old hall in Detroit, they prayed. That's the way we're going to do it. And it's a reel, so it starts and ends the same way. The ending is the same as the beginning in a reel. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down to the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early. So into the studio go Gord and the band, and they're recording the songs for Summertime Dream, my favorite Gordon Lightfoot album. I love singing the songs on that album in concert. And in between takes, and they're, adjusting microphones and working on this and working on that, changing instruments around, Gordon keeps playing those chords and humming this little tune. And Terry Clements said, "What is that? What are you doing?" And Gord said, "Well, it's this shipwreck song I'm working on." And Terry said, "Well, how are you going to start it?" And Gord said, "I don't know. Come up with something." And Terry told me this story, that he came back and said, "Hey, Gord, your shipwreck song, how about this?" What Terry liked to do a lot of times was play the vocal line in a song on his guitar as a lead guitar player. He'd do it in the middle, like as a bridge. Well, he played that vocal line that Gord had been humming on an acoustic guitar. And Gord said, "No, that's not it. It's too soft. This is about a storm. This has got to have some intensity to it. It's got to be intense. It's got to really grab you." And Terry said, "Oh, okay." Well, he came back later and said, "Hey, what if I played this on my electric guitar and I played it through a distortion pedal and it sounded like this?" It's what we've heard on the record. And Gord said, "That's it. I love that. That's really good. That's good." And Rick Haynes, the bass player, said, "So what happened to this ship? Was it in a collision?" "Oh, a storm. Do you want the bass to like thunder sometimes?" Gord said, "That could work." Ed Ringwald, who played pedal steel guitar and played under the stage name of Pee Wee Charles, said, "You want the steel to kind of like have an eerie type of sound, it's kind of like wind, like a wind thing?" Gord said, "That could work. That could work." Anyway, back to business. We got work to do here, the producer said. So they continue on doing the songs on Summertime Dream. And this was a process that took a while, and they're working and working and working. And one day they got some time left at the end of the session, and Gord just pops out of nowhere and says, "Hey, since we got a little time left here, let's play the shipwreck song. Let's play it all the way through." And the guys in the band said, "What do we play? We've never heard it." He said, "Well, just, I've kind of hummed it. I mean, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. Terry's going to start it for us, and Rick will come in with some bass, and, Pee Wee's going to add some stuff. Just play what you feel. Just play what you feel. It's a song that's got a lot of feeling in it." Well, okay, let's go. They started to play it. They got about verse and a half into it, 2 verses into it, and Gord stopped them and said, No, it's too fast. It's got to have soul. It's got to have more meaning. You've got to feel it more. Slow it down and play what you feel. Jump in and play what you feel. Okay, let's go. He counted it down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They started the song and they got going. And just before they started, Barry Keane, the drummer, brought up a topic. And he said, "Gord, am I in this? Do we have drums in this song?" And Gord said, "Yeah, I'll nod to you when to come in." Like nothing about hit the hi-hat or the cymbal or play the snare drum first or the tom. Just I'll nod to you when to come in. Very little direction. They got to the second verse after that. Gordon nodded at Barry, and he came in on the drums, and they played all the way through it, and they got it done. They played through the song. And Terry told me that he said, "Sheesh, that gave me the chills down my spine." And Rick said, "Gord, I think you've got a hit here with this, Maybe this ought to be on the record," the guys said. Well, the producer knew they had 10 songs all picked out, and they were working on those. Well, why don't we just tell the record company to listen to it and see what they think? I mean, this album was going to come out a year after the ship went down, On the other side of the glass The engineer in the recording session said, "You guys want to hear it back again?" He said, "You mean you recorded it?" "Well, you've been fooling around with it for 2 weeks. I figured if you were going to play it all the way through, I'd roll tape." So he had it on tape. They listened to it. And they said, wow. They played it for the record company. The record company said, "All right, get it ready to put on the album like you're doing the other songs, and we'll think about it." They worked on that song for 2 weeks, playing it over and over and over again, and they never could get it to sound the way that it sounded that first time they played it. And that's what you heard on the radio, the first time they had ever played the song. The guys in the band had no idea how it was going to go. They had never heard the words. You don't make records that way. And that's how that one was made. And it was 6 minutes long. And no radio station's going to play that back in that era. And you know what? They all did play it. They all played it. And it was the #1 song in Canada on their radio charts. #1. #2 in our country, by the way. Our top 40 had The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald as #2. #1 on the top 40 charts, Barry Manilow, I Write the Songs. The Hot 100, which includes a little more rock and roll in it, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, #2. #1 on the Hot 100, Rod Stewart, Tonight's the Night. Sometimes it works out that way. So, it's a song that's a story song. Gord was very proud of it. He was proud of the way it came out. Yeah, it was a big hit for him. Yeah, it made a lot of money. Yeah, he contributed 2 scholarships every year to the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, where Thomas Benson and David Weiss had gone to school and were on the Fitzgerald. And those scholarships continue to be given out today. Yeah, it was a big song that resonated in different ways with family members. Some have told me at first they didn't like it. And the reason? Because back in the 1970s, we had a lot of what we referred to as bubblegum music. And the bubblegum songs would come on, and then after that would be The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And then they'd finish and right into another bubblegum song. And some family members told me they didn't think it fit in that context. But as time went on, more and more family members were contacted by Gordon and had contact with him personally and through the mail. And they began to think of it as their song. I mean, it's about their men. It's about their ship. And I think today, it's probably pretty universally thought of in a good way, in a real good way. So, we're proud to be here to play it for you. We're going to do that after the call to the last watch. And I did find out, as I mentioned today, and if you weren't there to hear it, I'll tell you again, the rest of you can hear it again, that I did find out that Gordon did make it to the pearly gates. And when he got there, St. Peter was waiting at the podium, and he said, "Come on in, Gordon. Bring your guitar. We've got 29 men up here from a ship that are pretty anxious to meet you." Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, you're a natural storyteller, and thank you for sharing that. Now, it's time for the call to the last watch. This is the one time each year that we take the display case off of the Edmund Fitzgerald bell. It's the one time each year that that bell is made available for all of you to come and ring it, or each individual it's designated for each crew member that was on the Fitzgerald. We are going to ring it 31 times tonight. That's 29 times for each sailor on the Edmund Fitzgerald, a 30th time for all sailors lost on the Great Lakes, and a 31st time in memory of Gordon Lightfoot. So I'll introduce Sean Lay, our development officer. Sean's been with the Shipwreck Society for 35 years now. Let's give Sean a round of applause.
called to the last watch. Captain Ernest M. McSorley. John H. McCarthy. James Pratt. Michael Armagost. John D. Simmons. Eugene W. O'Brien. John J. Poviak. Thomas D. Borgeson. Ransom E. Cundy. William J. Spangler. Bruce L. Hudson. David E. Weiss. Robert C. Rafferty. Alan G. Coleman. Frederick J. Beecher. Nolan F. Church. George J. Hall. Edward F. Bindon. Thomas E. Edwards. Carl A. Peckall. Mark A. Thomas. Paul M. Rebot. Russell G. Haskell. Oliver J. Champeau. Blaine H. Wilhelm. Ralph G. Walton. Thomas Benson. Joseph W. Mays. Gordon F. McClellan. ringing in remembrance of all mariners lost on the Great Lakes. And ringing for Gordon Lightfoot.
Thank you, Sean. And now we'll have the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute.
It's our honor to play this song for you, for the men that died, for the families that survived, and for Gordon Lightfoot, who wrote this song. Remember, there'll be two different changes in the words from what you heard on the record. And if you're on drums, I'll nod to you when to come in. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6.
largest gathering of this kind that we've had, at least in my time here over the last 15 years. And I think if there's anything that I can say, if the events of really this year, if you look at all the books that have been published, if you look at the artwork, if you look at the various memorials that are taking place all over the Great Lakes in different parts of the country, much less the, be it 2,000 or 3,000 people that we had here today, I think it's safe to say, and this is to all the Fitzgerald family members, that your lost loved ones, this ship and crew will not be forgotten. I think we can safely assume that at this point. So to round out, I'm going to shift focus a little bit. I'd like to ask if we have any, I'm going to say members of the military in a second, but if we have any Marines or former Marines in the audience, I'd like you to stand up. It's the 250th anniversary of the Marine Corps. Let's give these Marines a round of applause. Thank you for your service. And now anybody else who's ever served in the military before, please stand and let's give them a round of applause. As you can probably imagine, there's a lot of work that goes into making this event a reality. For our Shipwreck Society staff that's here, and I know we've got a number of us, let's have the Shipwreck team, the Shipwreck Society staff, stand and let's give them a round of applause as well. Your work isn't actually done yet, because next door in the museum store after the event we have all kinds of things. Sarah, what all do we have?
We have charcuterie, we have veggie trays, fruit trays, spanakopita, we have all kinds of goodies.
We have all kinds of goodies.
So please come.
Please come. Please join us afterwards right in the museum store. I will say be careful, because I've had various notes handed to me that it is actually snowing again out there. So be careful as you walk over there. And finally, one last time, I'm going to say thanks again for everybody coming out here. It makes me feel good. I know it makes the rest of our staff feel good to have you all joining us. We weren't sure how we were going to get this many chairs inside this space, but somehow Sarah made it happen here. Let's give Sarah a round of applause. I think each time I mentioned an additional 10 to 20 chairs, I would get a look from Sarah. A nice look, of course, of course. Be careful on the way home. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. And to round out the evening, Brother Jim Boynton.
Let us pray. Lord, as we come to the end of our commemoration, we thank you for the lives we remember and the community they have formed. Your last words on the cross, Lord, were, "It is finished." Let our words today be, "It carries on." Captain Ernest McSorley's last words were, "We are holding our own." Now, after 50 years, let ours be, "We are holding our loved ones in memory and holding each other in love." Amen.
And with that, that ends this memorial event for the Edmund Fitzgerald. Be careful as you walk over to the museum store, and everybody who is watching from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, thank you as well for joining us. Have a good evening, everybody.